Hello and welcome to another episode of the AIGA Design Podcast. My name is Lishan Huang, Co-Executive Director of Learning and Programs here at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. On this season of the show, we are exploring the theme of design and performance, which will culminate in our design conference this October 9th through 11th in Los Angeles, California. Now for my co-host and our guest.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Donatello. I'm the Design Competitions and Event Manager at AIGA.
And now for our guest for this episode, Sunny Bonnell from Motto. Hi, Sunny. Thank you for joining us on the show.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's jump straight into things. Can you please share a bit more about yourself and your career journey so far? You have such an interesting non-linear career path that we're looking forward to exploring with you, from street musician, actor, to veterinarian, to designer. So yeah, can you walk us through a bit of that journey and what motivated you to follow this path?
Yeah, well, I come from a bit of a colorful background, as you illuminated there, which is street musician to performance artist to vet school, pre-vet, to dropping out to becoming a designer in early 2005. So my co-founder and I dropped out of college together with $250, and we started Motto from a warehouse in a tiny coastal town in South Carolina. And at first glance, those, I guess, paths seem kind of disconnected, but there's a thread that absolutely ties them together, which is the desire was to just kind of excite people, energize people, inspire people. And whether it was through song or performance or animals, it just tied it all together. And I sort of found my calling moonlighting as a graphic designer on the side. So as I was going into pre-vet school, I was moonlighting for musicians and bands, developing posters, designing experiences, and just really fell in love with it. And I think at the heart of all of those was I was just trying to find a way to stir emotion and really inspire action. And I think founding Motto was that moment where I realized I could bring all of that into one place. So think of, as a performance artist, you're a bit of an orchestrator. And I think brand is tied to that, how you bring a lot of disparate parts together to create a whole or to create an entire picture. And so for me, it was just uniting all of those gifts and all of those skills that I had in my own zone of genius and applying them to something I was extremely passionate about and also just had a bit of an uncanny knack for. And so as we began to get clients and start to see that, hey, this could be a career, we just took and went full force on that vision and just went into it with full guts and vision and audacity to try to launch Motto into the stratosphere.
Yeah, looking forward to learning more about Motto. I also love that phrase that you used, zone of genius. I'm curious to follow up on that intro. What are your thoughts about this theme of design and performance? Obviously, you have a background as a performer, but how do you bring that into what you do now as a designer and as co-founder and CEO of Motto?
Well, performance isn't just for a stage. I think it's built into how we show up in the world and how we perform in the world. And it's tied to often our identities and our careers. So as a musician, I really learned, I think early on, I started playing music when I was 8 years old. So I grew up playing bluegrass and gospel and really being a performer from a very, very young age. So I learned how to be out in the world in front of a huge audience really, really young. And so both require a lot of presence and intentionality and also an understanding of your audience. So I think as a musician, I learned how to command attention. And then as I developed as a young leader, I learned how to command belief. And so the two of those things together, I think, made up sort of a unique background and unification of like these two worlds coming together to kind of give me some sense of confidence to be able to be in front of a lot of people at any given time. But also, what is the story you try to tell? You do that through brand, you do that through music. And I think that the best designers don't just make things, they really move people, they inspire people. And I believe that's performance.
Amazing.
Yes. So you mentioned that you're the co-founder and CEO of Motto, and you name it as a brand transformation agency, which I love the way you chose these words. I wanted to hear more from you. What do you mean by that? And also, what's the coolest part of owning your own business?
Well, Motto is a strategic brand transformation company. We really work with leaders and organizations at times of pivotal growth and transformation to help drive them into that future. So wherever they are trying to go, there's usually some element of transformation that needs to occur in order for them to reach that new height. And so what Motto does, we specialize in innovation and tech, although because we just celebrated our 20th year in business, actually this past March, we have been working across all types of verticals and sectors and different types of categories. But over the last couple of years, we've really, really focused on tech and innovation as a sweet spot because we find that we can really bolt on to like a big vision and be able to help their leadership team not only achieve that vision, but use brand and use culture to drive them into that new future. And we'd like to be a part of that. So transformation is really at the heart of everything we do. For organizations, there's a beginning state and then there's a next level state, and we're always transforming companies from that beginning state to that next transformation state. When I think of the coolest part of owning a business, I think if you would have asked me when I was 20 some years old, when I started Motto, it would have been about being able to wrestle your vision forward in a world that at the time, because we are female owned, the two of us we're young females in an industry that is not notoriously female dominated, right? It's male dominated. And so we were pretty rare in that regard to be two young females coming out to try to launch a branding company. And also, if you ask me now, the coolest part is that I get to build the kind of company that I always dreamed about in terms of like what I wanted and what we wanted Motto to be. So it allowed us to understand that there were businesses that we were working with, that we were in cultures day in and day out. And it allowed us to see kind of the good, bad, and the surprising. And it taught us a lot about that brand is not something that's left to the marketing department. Like brand is an inside job. It is inside the company and it's driven by vision and culture. And so it gave us a bit of a blueprint of like what we wanted our culture to be at Motto. And so I think the coolest thing about it is that I get to shape that culture, not just inside Motto, but for our clients too. And it's deeply fulfilling about helping a founder articulate a vision or a leadership team articulate a vision and then watching their team rally around it. And in some cases, what Ashley and I and the team do extraordinarily well is that you're not just building brands, you're really building belief systems. And so we can heavily influence that with the work that we do. And it's just very meaningful. I think in the beginning, it was about trying to prove doubters wrong. And then as the work and as we were able to have some staying power and we're able to do incredible work, it then became more meaningful, not about us, but about the people that we were working with and also the team that we started to build. So it was sort of selfish in the beginning because we were just young and just wanted to try to prove ourselves. But as we developed the business over time, it became much more about the people that we serve and the people that we work with in our team. And that is incredibly rewarding because you kind of go to business every day and you go to work every day with people that you really love and that you're really motivated by and inspired by. And at the same time, you get to do really amazing things with them.
That's amazing. Yeah, we wanted to come back to learning more about design shaping company cultures and stuff like that. But there's a few things that you had said earlier that stood out to me. One was this idea of influencing belief systems, or in a previous answer, you also talked about commanding belief as a leader, as a performer, as a designer. And so at Motto, you have a motto or a tagline of ideas worth rallying around. And yeah, how does that connect with belief systems and the work that you do?
Yeah. Well, we came up with that because at the heart of Motto is the nomenclature behind the word motto. The reason we called the company Motto is that a motto is a purpose, a cause, a belief. And we kept asking ourselves, what are we doing for companies? What are we doing in our work? And it really was about shaping ideas and helping these companies find their motto and articulate that motto and drive it down through the brand. And as we began to think about what makes a powerful idea, Well, a powerful idea is something that you can rally around, that people can support, can believe in, and help you build. And so we landed on this concept of ideas worth rallying around. The way that we define that is an idea worth rallying around is the signature idea that sits at the heart of a business and makes it famous. It is the thing that you become known in the world for. And a lot of organizations know this. They have it within the walls of everything that they're doing. But a lot of times it's not codified. A lot of times it's sort of shuffled down and into a tagline, which a big idea is much, much bigger than that. It is internal and external, and it's omnidirectional. So when we're working with a client, we're really trying to help them define and articulate, but also come alive that big idea so that they can really push it through the culture, push it down through the brand, and like ultimately rally their entire audiences around it and their people.
That's awesome. It's very interesting how you start with brand, and then you mentioned about company culture, and then it transformed in belief systems. Um, what do you think, looking back now? You mentioned that your company just celebrated 20 years. Congratulations. That's a big deal.
Thank you. Thank you.
What do you see as the major shift in the design ecosystem over the past years or even decades?
I think design used to be a very intimate process. And I think with AI and democratized tools, it's everywhere and it's faster than ever and everyone has access to it. And in some ways, that's powerful because it allows us to be more powerful than ever and to use these tools in really exciting ways. It's not just about speed or access. I think the real shift is in the meaning. You know, in a world really flooded with content, I think leaders and designers are being asked, like, what does this stand for? Why does it matter? And how do I make this, in some ways, original? And is originality even part of our vernacular anymore? And I think the future of design is really going to be tied to how we use these tools for forces of good, but also use them in a way that allows us to not just make things pretty, but make them matter. And that's going to be a really challenging thing because now we're sort of democratizing design in a way that is more saturated than ever before. I mean, even when we started Motto, there was probably, I would say, under 1,000 design agencies, right? Or at the time, maybe advertising agencies, and very few of them called themselves branding agencies. But now there's something like 600,000, right? Or maybe even more here in the US. Then it's just a noisy, saturated landscape out there right now. And I think it's becoming harder for brands to have something to say, have something to say that's meaningful, be able to rise above the noise, and to be able to get themselves like noticed in a way where you can remember who's who. I'm even on calls now where folks will be kind of shuffling their papers and be like, okay, you're from Motto, right? Because they're talking to like 20 firms. And so when we started to realize that was happening, we were like, okay, how do we actually, what is our zone of genius core differentiator? What do we really have that maybe is really unique to us? And so it's causing a lot of inward looking in order to be more efficient outwardly.
Yeah. We're talking about this democratization of design and of leadership. And so I wanted to talk about something else you're involved in, which is Vision Camp. You're the co-founder and creator of Vision Camp, which is a leadership program. So can you tell us more about Vision Camp and what sets us apart from other leadership programs and who is it for?
Well, Vision Camp was a really interesting idea. It started because we realized as we were working with leadership teams, and we have clients as big as Virgin to, real innovation companies, and to Microsoft, to Google, like big innovation teams. And one of the things that we kept sort of coming back to was like there was always sort of a visionary or a set of visionaries at the top, but as you went down through the company, you started to see that there was splinters in that vision. And when we did some research on this, we learned that only 1 in 10,000 organizations are ran by a visionary or ran by what their team considers is a visionary leader. So that means about 1 in 10,000, 0.1%. That told us that visionary leadership is kind of not the rule, and that visionaries are an exception. And so we wondered, well, how could we not only train and teach visionary leadership, but how could we bring leadership teams to Vision Camp to educate them on what a vision statement actually is, what are the traits of visionaries, and how do you mobilize people around that vision to drive innovation? And we realized there was nowhere you could go to actually learn about this. You can go to brand workshops, you can go to leadership workshops, you can train on AI, you can train on coding, but you can't really be trained on vision. Are you visionary or are you not visionary? And how do you know the differences? And so we launched Vision Camp about 2 years ago with a pilot, and we ran 3 pilots and they all sold out. And we just opened it to anyone who wanted to join. And we had leaders from all around the world join, from everywhere from Nigeria to Europe and beyond. And it was such an incredible thing because we were like, okay, people actually want this and they want to know about it. And then we realized putting on events and trying to do it that way was not ideal. So we decided to turn it into an executive leadership workshop. So now what we do is over 2 days, we work with teams, usually somewhere in the neighborhood of under 15, steering groups, and we bring them together. And over 2 days, virtually or in person, we walk them through day 1, which is about education, and day 2 is about empowerment and building out. What we've developed is a vision script, which their entire team builds and is proprietary to us. No one else has it because it's been developed over a really long period of time. And we have these teams build their own vision script and they run that out over the next year. And so we check in with them over the course of a year to see how they're doing. So the last team that we ran it through was the Minnesota Vikings, and Vision Camp drove their 2025 strategic vision. So it's a very powerful program. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what it can actually be. It's sort of new, and I'm sure that it's going to take some time to get its footing. But so far, we're seeing a tremendous amount of excitement around it just because there's nothing out there like it.
Amazing. I feel like we could do a whole episode just on that.
The next one, you just invite me back for that.
Exactly. And it's so interesting that the workshop doesn't end. So the whole process, it just stays with them and you check on them after a year. That's amazing to see.
Yeah, because
the impact
implementation
on those days. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because vision is really hard for a lot of teams to action. A lot of times it belongs to the visionary or the visionaries of that company rather than it being something that they know how to extract from the visionary and then down throughout the company so that they can act on it and build upon it. And so we've created this sort of framework that allows you to do that. And it's incredible. I mean, the outcomes of what people have done after Vision Camp is really exciting. We've worked with people who are starting companies, but also entire steering groups of big organizations that have ran through Vision Camp. The other cool thing, and I'll just make this quick note and wrap it, but we also give out badges and certificates. So when you graduate from Vision Camp, you get a certificate and you get a set of badges just to, again, like bring this down through your team, because we believe that if we create a world where there are more visionaries in organizations, not only do they run better teams, but they run more provocative and innovative teams if someone is actually trained on what vision and visionary leadership actually is, because there are things about it that a lot of people don't know. It's very important to understand the differences, because there is differences between being a manager, a boss, a leader, and number one, a visionary leader. And how do you be the best that you can possibly be so that you can inspire people to do the things that you want them to do so that they feel like they're part of something greater? And Vision Camp is the answer to that.
That's great. That's very, very cool to learn. So, Sunny, I'm sure you have learned and even unlearned many things throughout your career. What's a common piece of advice that you strongly disagree with, and what is the alternative perspective that usually you bring to the table?
Just show us something to get started. That famous quote, right? I think that request that I see a lot from teams feels like an outdated practice, meaning if you have created a brief and you go out to 15 agencies and you ask that agency to show you some ways in, I think it devalues creative thinking. And it also, visionary thinking doesn't come from a one-off mock-up. It comes from partnership, it comes from trust, and it comes from deeper understanding. When clients invest in that thinking, they get ideas that can really change their company. I always say if it's free, it's probably not worth much. Not to say that it's not valuable, because it can be valuable. But I think for the work that we do specifically, it's important to invest in the minds that are trying to solve a real business problem. And usually business problems are complex. They're multifaceted. They require you to study. I'm pretty good in the room when I hear a client walk me through in a 30-minute call what their hopes and dreams are and what their challenges are, because I've gotten really good at pattern recognition. When you begin to solve these problems a lot and again and again and again, your expertise becomes incredibly valuable because you're able to ascertain where they're at probably in a matter of minutes. But in order to solve it, you need to take time. You need to be paid for that time. And so I think it really is a disadvantage to creative companies everywhere that we're being asked to do that kind of sort of spec work. I mean, there's probably some form of that that's going on, but I think we're in 2025 and we shouldn't be doing that to creative companies any longer. And I really fundamentally disagree with that practice. I think you can have a great brief, but you're hiring someone to come out and give you an evaluation and to really understand the intricacies of your business, which often can't be summarized in a 30-minute call. You need to do a little bit more work. And so I think you should be paid for that work. And maybe if you narrow it down to 3 companies, like pay those 3 companies a nominal amount to just get some initial ideas or iterations if that's what you want. But I don't believe in asking companies for free work.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I was actually just speaking to another studio owner about this very topic last week. So hopefully more folks start to understand this and figure out ways to act collectively on this. And so on this theme of things that you disagree with, orthodoxies that you are opposing, my next question is about yet another hat that you wear, Sunny, which is that of best-selling author. You wrote a book called Rare Breed, A Guide to Success for the Defiant, Dangerous, and Different, which is a book that flips the script on business as usual kind of thinking, has readers think about other paths for success. So yeah, can you tell us about that book? And yeah, what are some of these ways to be defiant, dangerous, and different?
Well, a lot of companies want to be brave, but there's a price to being that. And for brands, I think you have to straddle this contradiction a lot, which is you have to be bold, but you have to be strategic. You have to be human, but you have to be scalable. You have to be rebellious, but you have to be relevant. And we help companies kind of laser in on that. But the book is actually about individual traits that then can be applied to company traits. So in the book, Rare Breed, A Guide to Success for the Defiant, Dangerous, and Different, we cover 7 so-called vices that society deems are counterintuitive to your success, meaning everything that you've ever been told, quiet down, keep your head down, don't ruffle feathers, right? That's not great advice, because ultimately, if that is a superpower of yours, meaning rebellious is something that you bring to the table, well, that is a gift. That is a virtue, not a vice. However, over time, because those traits also have a dark side, they can be, in fact, a vice. And so the book really educates you on how do you take a vice or a so-called vice and turn that into a virtue. What was interesting about the book and why I think it took off was because it started with the individual, meaning, you know, I think Ashley and I, way back early on, probably being audacious, being rebellious, being hot-blooded, being all the traits that we talk about in the book, it was our superpower. It allowed us to actually break through. But at the same time, you have to temper it, because if you come into every room banging on the table or slamming doors or being so rebellious that you don't hear anybody else's ideas or opinions, like, it can turn into that vice and that dark side really, really quickly. And so it was really about education. How do you actually turn that gift that you have? How do you use it in a way where you don't get fired from every job that you ever work on,
right?
Because one of these traits are at play. But more importantly, then what we saw happen was leaders were reading the book and then bringing it to their companies and saying, I think we might be one of these traits as an organization. And I would love to know who on my team is one of these 7 vices. And so then we created a quiz. We had something close to 30,000 people in the first year take the quiz. And the quiz, rarebreedquiz.com, it allows you to take 28 questions and it tells you what is your dominant virtue. And then it tells you what are the positives of that virtue and what are the negatives of that virtue and how do you use that virtue to your advantage. And then we had companies doing it and they were like, we want to be more rebellious. We want to be more audacious. So it was just really cool to see that happen with the book. But that's kind of the heart of it.
Yeah. We'll post a link to that in the show notes and the description for this episode as well. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I feel like, yeah, a lot of these traits are sort of like they're what makes somebody unique, what makes a creative professional, a creative leader unique. But then it's like learning how to balance that, right? Of like, okay, how do you be defiant to push things internally within a culture, but not so much that you get fired from every job, as you were saying, and that finding that balance is like a
Right,
real
right.
part of that journey.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sunny, you're bringing many perspectives of examples of performance when it comes to company performance, but also the creative professionals side. I'm curious to hear from you. What do you think was the best failure, or let's say unexpected outcome that taught you about performance?
Interestingly, just coming off the tail end of the book, the original iteration of Rare Breed got rejected, I think 15 to 16 times by every major
Wow.
publisher. Mm-hmm. And it was because we had positioned the book incorrectly. So we had the right name and we had a fairly good subtitle, but we were kind of coming at it as a branding book. And I remember all the publishers were like, yeah, this is such an incredible book, but branding books don't sell. And so they rejected it right out of the gate. And so we went to our agent and we were like, we're not gonna give up on the book. So we want to rewrite it. And so we tore the whole thing down, rewrote it. And we penned all the letters, all the rejection letters up on the wall and rewrote to all the rejection letters because we just had a feeling that we were onto something with the title and the subtitle. And so we rewrote the book and we rewrote it through this lens of what if the parts of yourself that other people criticize, traits they call defiant, dangerous, and different, were actually your superpowers. How could you succeed because of who you are, not despite who you are? And that became the thesis of the book. And so we went back to all of those publishers and it went to a bidding war.
Wow.
And it taught us a lot about resilience and perseverance and tenacity, but it also it taught us a lot about belief. When you have something to say, how important it is to just not give up and to keep pushing, because with every no, there's a yes on the next one. So that is a huge lesson. And as an entrepreneur, you just have to be willing to hear no a lot, but not always listen.
Yeah, on that point of listening, and yeah, curious about like some of your rituals or habits that you see as being essential to your success and how you got to where you are now. So yeah, do you have any habits or rituals that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I run a global team now. So Ashley and I have scaled the company. We were originally just leadership consultants, and now we've grown the team to, I think we're nearing about 45 to 50 people. And one of the things that I have had to learn how to do is I was always an early riser, but I'm an even earlier riser now. And it's because the world is noisy and Slack is noisy and teams are noisy and there's a lot of pressure. And as a leader, you need time to just kind of reflect and get quiet for a minute so that you can be effective. Mm-hmm. And so I really try to hold space early in the morning to allow me to let my brain kind of wander, like just kind of think about the day or think about core strategic initiatives that we have going on at the company. We're writing a second book. There's lots of initiatives that we're working on. And so I just try to protect that space a little bit so that I can be really effective for the team and also available to the team, because we have people in Europe and so they're up early, right? Like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. Yeah. Chats lit up all hours of the day and night. And you need to be able to give your brain those little spaces to kind of quiet down for a minute so that you can be more effective.
Yeah, that reminds me of the parable of the cup. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's like a story from Zen, but basically like the quick version of it is like this guy who wants to become enlightened goes to visit a Zen master and is like asking, basically like, Sensei, teach me, give me your wisdom. And the Zen master comes and like starts serving tea and then just keeps pouring the tea until it overflows, right? And
yes.
The guy who goes to the master's like, what are you doing? The cup is overflowing. And then the master finally stops and says, well, this is, this cup represents your mind, and you need to first empty your cup before you are ready to receive more. And I think as leaders, especially with global teams, like you have to be connected a lot all the time, dealing with time zones, but also just as creatives, we're always reading things, looking for inspiration, looking at mood boards, whatever that is. And sometimes you also need like quiet to be within our own thoughts, before we can handle all of these inputs and decisions.
Well, we have this thing at Motto called Motto and Friends, where we bring, I'll just touch on this really quickly, but we have people that come in from all around the world, and for 45 minutes, they just tell us like their greatest stories or lessons and teachings. And we had a team come on that are neuroscientists, and they taught our team about how even just a few years ago, you were interrupted maybe every 3 to 4 minutes. Now you're interrupted every 11 seconds. And I think it's probably even less than that. So when you said, I need to turn off my Slack notifications, it's because you're being pinged all day long. And you have to have time where you step away from that for a minute to just try to say, like, what am I trying to accomplish today? Because those things are really distracting. And so as a leader, I think you have to find the balance between being always on, which you are as a leader, especially if you're a CEO like me. You don't probably sleep a lot, and you're on quite a bit, and you have a lot of demands and pressures. And so you kind of have to have time to read and learn so that you can be on the cutting edge of what you're doing. Like, I'm an avid and a voracious reader. I read, I watch courses. I'm constantly learning and studying. And it's because I protect that time so that I can know what's happening in the culture. And I can be really a strong leader to my team so that they're not saying things and using slang that I don't know anything about. I gotta be into what is going on around me. So it's important to protect that time.
So yeah, on that topic of what you're reading about, what you're connecting to, like, where do you go for inspiration, and what are some of the ways you stay up to date and innovative?
Well, I watch a lot of courses, like Masterclass is a really good one. I read a lot of books. I study a lot about philosophy, science, design, leadership. I read a lot of leadership books. I'm really obsessed with like patterns and contradictions and what's happening at the edge of culture. And I just try to, and we also have a learning development program at Motto. And so everything that our team watches or is learning about, I watch too, just because I want to be up to speed on what they're learning about, what they're into, and also AI advancements. So that's a really big one recently, is like very into AI at the moment. And just really paying attention to what is on the radar of everyone, and particularly the culture. Podcasts, of course, and good biking, like get out on a bike, throw on a podcast and this podcast and
Totally.
and learn.
That's a great company culture for sure.
Yes. And it's a huge culture bonus because you will always find a reason not to do that work. You will always find a reason not, you'll say, I'm too busy or I can't do that. And so we actually like really embed it into the very fabric of what we do at Motto, because we just believe that if we invest in our people and we invest in the learning of our people, that we're going to have more innovative thinkers and we're going to have happier teammates, because they're going to be able to bring that thinking and that leading to everything that they do. So we invest in leadership coaching and development. And we just really push for that development so that person really feels like they're on a journey of growth.
Yeah, and especially you said that the company grew and now you have teams in other locations. That's also a good way of making sure that everyone feels like they belong to the same company. That's great. Yeah, great weekly habits for sure. So as we start to wrap up, I wanted to hear from you a recommendation, and it could be like a book, a show, a movie, or any type of media that you have listened or have engaged with lately that you want to share with our listeners.
Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Have you all watched
Amazing.
that?
Yeah, I
No, I
got to
haven't.
eat at the restaurant like 10 years ago with the son's restaurant, not because by that point, Jiro himself had stopped. It was no longer like a real restaurant. It was like a private club. Like you had to know somebody to get in there. Whereas like the son had built an identical restaurant to his father in a different neighborhood of Tokyo. But
I thought that was a fascinating documentary in terms of, I think more so about the pursuit of perfection. So the storyline is that a sushi maker is on this quest. He's been making sushi for over 90 years. And one of the biggest existential questions that he has is like, will I ever reach perfection? Have I folded the perfect piece of sushi? And I think that that is such an empowering motivation for people like me who are kind of obsessed with the details and are a bit of a perfectionist, and being able to sort of say, like, how do I master what my craft is? And can I master multiple domains of mastery? And I think design is just about not always inventing something new, but rather it's often doing those things better and better and better. And it's about you and your craft and your journey of who you're trying to become, that you have to sort of prove that to. And I love the film because it's really a film about what it means to devote your life to your craft. And so much of us, our identities are tied up in the things that we do and the things that we love and work. And so when we continue to define that and refine that over time is an incredible thing to do. I highly recommend it.
Amazing. Yeah, and it's available on streaming, so folks should definitely check that out. As we wrap up our time together, Sunny, we'd like to ask our guests to give a call to action for our listeners and our viewers, for folks who are watching this on YouTube. So just, let people know where they can find you and your work online. We'll post this in the show notes as well, but sometimes it's helpful for people to hear it as well.
Well, you can find Motto at wearemotto.com, on Instagram and LinkedIn at wearemotto. You can also find a little bit about me at sunnybonnell.com. And you can also learn about Vision Camp at visioncamp.io. And if you want to learn a little bit about the book, it's available wherever books are sold, but highly available on like Amazon or Barnes & Noble. So any of those channels, and for anybody listening, love to connect with you and reach out. Love starting new conversations and making friends. So feel free to reach out and say hello.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sunny Bonnell. Yeah, we really appreciated learning about your story, hearing about Motto, Vision Camp, the book as well. I look forward to diving into some of that stuff myself, learning more about all of the stuff that you do. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys having me.
Awesome. And thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the AIGA Design Podcast. You know what to do in terms of finding us at AIGA Design. Subscribe, like, send us a message, whatever you'd like to help support the show. And thank you to AIGA members for making this possible as well. We are a nonprofit membership organization. And so we like to, thank you and also, allow us to tell these stories and make them available to the entire design community. So I'm Li-Shan Huang on behalf of Julia Donatello. We will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.